The Greek Parthenon was the perfect setting to base my next map upon. Its dimensions were ideal for the size map I was looking to create, and its pillars would provide interesting cover for the player. I also have a strong background in ancient architecture, so I was able to put that knowledge to use as well. Unfortunately, Unreal Tournament 3 was set in the distant future, so most of the packaged assets were not usable for the setting I was looking to create. So I modeled and textured almost the entire map myself, and also recorded and edited the sound clips to be used throughout. After much research and 3 months of development time, the map was completed. The result is a 1-to-1 scale recreation of the Parthenon in its deteriorated state. Here's what I came up with, and afterwards I'll discuss some of the design philosophies used in creating this map. So here it is. Please enjoy. The most important part of any map's design is its flow, which can be defined as the player's ability to move and fight easily from area to area. When the development of this map began, a basic version of the Parthenon's layout was created. After playtesting, it was apparent that some changes needed to be made in order to make the map flow better. The first changes made were to the entrances of the Parthenon. This map was designed so that the interior of the Parthenon was a central area in which players would fight. However, the real Parthenon only has 2 entrances, located here and here. This created 2 bottlenecks and made the other 2 sides of the Parthenon dead zones, and hence pointless. So holes were created in the Parthenon's walls, acting as doorways and giving players easier access to the interior. 2 secret passages were also added to give players from certain locations access to the interior at the expense of being vulnerable while crouching. The other major change to the real Parthenon's layout was the addition of staircases and a second floor. Fighting on flat ground is boring. The second level was made to combat this by increasing the complexity of the interior and making the battles within more interesting. It also provided a way to give access to the roof, which I'll discuss a bit later. Because the interior of the Parthenon is the place where the player prefers to be, mainly due to the safety it provides, spawn points were placed accordingly. Players spawn on the outside of the map and need to work their way into the Parthenon, instead of spawning where they want to be to begin with. This was the first step in giving the player direction, which is very important for map flow. However, having all the spawn points only on the outside perimeter of the Parthenon was too predictable, especially for players camping respawn points. So a few points were placed on the inside of the Parthenon and also in the cave below. This cave was added for several reasons, but its main purpose was to increase the complexity of the outer area and to provide the player with a shortcut to the other side of the map. The map was made more interesting by adding complexity, while being careful not to disturb flow, which is not always the easiest thing to do. As mentioned earlier, fighting in open areas is boring. It's also important that areas aren't too crowded with objects as well. Although Unreal Tournament 3 doesn't feature a robust cover system like Gears of War, Providing players with plenty of objects to seek refuge behind is a critical component of any good map. The central assets of this map that provide the player cover and make the map fun to play are the pillars. Players are able to weave in and out of the pillars to avoid fire, and they also provide places to hide. The pillars provide strategic cover, and without them the map would be too open and boring. I also tried some new things with the pillars and cover, which I'll discuss in just a moment. Balance is a key component of any map, and is very closely related to its flow. It's important to give every player a fair chance of winning the match, otherwise it won't be fun to play. One way of doing this is through weapon and item placement. Unreal Tournament 3 does a good job with its balance amongst weapons. Most of the weapons are about equal in strength, with a few exceptions. Due to the openness of this map, the sniper rifle was incredibly overpowered. Any player with decent accuracy had an unfair advantage when the sniper rifle was in their possession. Because of this, the sniper rifle was left out of the map entirely. I like to create maps where every player can easily and quickly get a decent weapon. No one likes to fight without a good weapon, or travel far distances to get one. It's frustrating. So weapons are placed fairly close to the player's spawn points. That way, when a player spawns, they are able to quickly grab a weapon and are ready for action. This complemented the map's flow nicely and created more balanced matches between players. The rocket launcher, which is a highly sought after gun, was placed in the cave that runs underneath the Parthenon. Before the rocket launcher was added, this area of the map was often neglected. Placing the rocket launcher there spread out the map a bit and makes the player work a little more for what is classically the most popular weapon in the game. The Redeemer, on the other hand, which is a special weapon that is extremely lethal and seldom spawns, was placed opposite of the rocket launcher at the very top of the Parthenon. It is placed in the most difficult and dangerous area of the map to get to, and it creates a sort of king of the hill feel for the map. Players that are willing to take the risk and journey to the top are rewarded with the most dangerous weapon of the game. In regards to flow and player direction, this location is each player's ultimate goal. Earlier I discussed how the player's direction is inward, to the inside of the Parthenon, and ultimately to the top to get the Redeemer. However, I didn't want players who got inside to necessarily stay inside. It's important always to keep the player moving from agenda to agenda. This was done through item placement. Ammo and weapons were placed so that players couldn't just stay inside the Parthenon. They would have to venture back outside or to the lower floors to get ammo or different weapons. Instead of being fortified with weapons, the inside of the Parthenon contains mostly health pickups and armor. This item placement doesn't just complement the flow of the map, it prevents the inside of the Parthenon from being an unbalanced camping zone. It also gives each zone of the map a purpose and the player direction. Some areas, despite weapon and item placement, are inherently unbalanced. The area outside the Parthenon, because it is rather open, is a disadvantageous place to be. Players on the inside of the Parthenon had both cover and clear shots at players trying to enter from the outside. To add balance, some broken pillars were placed on the outside of the Parthenon, and the terrain was changed to have more hill-like features. The outer hills were then covered with tall grass. These three elements combined provide cover for players located on the outside of the Parthenon, which helped balance the two zones. I also took a design risk and created a rather large lens flare coming from the sun. This was deliberately made so that players looking out from the Parthenon would have their vision obstructed from the glare. Visually, the lens flare is beautiful, and it's something I've never seen tried before on this scale. On the other hand, it's somewhat experimental, and I haven't decided if I will use this technique again in future projects. All in all, the lens flare does do a good job providing cover, and it helps add more balance between the outer and inner zones. The last component of map balance that I'll talk about is predictability. Players should never, ever be able to predict where other players will come from. Campers thrive on this, and in general, it creates a boring map. It's better to keep the player on their toes and moving. This philosophy was heavily used in the design of the Parthenon itself. The entrances added to increase map flow, which were discussed earlier, also create an unpredictable environment inside. When designing a deathmatch map, a room should never have only one entrance. That's too predictable. In the case of this map, the zones in the Parthenon all have 4 entrances, which balances them, and makes the direction in which the enemy is coming from unpredictable. This makes the map a lot more fun to play by never letting the player know who's coming from where.